Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Goosebumps Presents TV book line. This book is number 13. It's written by Carol Ellis, which is basing the story off the screenplay written by Jeffrey Cohen, which is based on book 22 from the original 62, written by R.L. Stine. And the TV book in question for this review today is Ghost Beach. Now, this was actually the first time I've ever read Ghost Beach's TV book. I've read a few casually in my time. I even remember reading some as a kid. But this was one I was kind of waiting for when I got to Ghost Beach, just to see out of morbid curiosity if I liked this story or this iteration of Ghost Beach more than the original 62 book or the episode or even the comic adaptation from Goosebumps Graphics. And I have to say, for my personal preference, which I don't normally put into the ratings or what I score the books at the end of the video, I would say up front, I prefer this over any other iteration of Ghost Beach that I've seen. And I'll get into why near the end, but it's not going to play into my rating whatsoever. But yeah, that's there. And if you're not familiar with how I rate Goosebumps Presents TV books, it's normally not based on enjoyment whatsoever. Actually, I'm basing my ratings on the supplement quality and how it mirrors the episode that it's basing from. So what I'm getting across from that is these books back in the 90s were made as supplements for TV episodes. And this was a common practice back in the day because syndicated television was kind of hard to pinpoint when your favorite episode would air. You probably had to use a TV guide or primitive internet to look up TV listings. So more often than not, kids were, more susceptible to buy something like this because it, pretty much put into words their favorite episode and included pictures from the episode to make them remember their favorite scenes or something like that. And often, because of the page count, it was more accessible for younger readers or kids who just didn't like to read 122-page Proust novellas like Goosebumps normally is, and read something that's like 50 to 60 pages instead. Now, because of that, that's how I normally, rate these books by the end, because I'm basing this off of how good of a supplement it is for its episode, which this is trying to replace the need of. So with that out the way, let's get into the plot overview of the TV book without giving too much away. So the story starts off with the the two main characters of the story, Jerry and Terry Sadler. They are over in New England on a beach somewhere along the coastline in the summertime, and they are out in a graveyard. And Terry, Jerry's sister, is tracing some gravestones within the graveyard with some crayons and some paper. And Jerry hears some noises going on by a nearby gravestone, essentially. And the gravestone reads Harrison Sadler. And this makes him question if this is possibly an ancestor of his. But when he's investigating the gravestone, he's shocked and dismayed by some hands reaching out from the ground and some weird noises. This scares the living daylights out of him. But it turns out it's these two kids named Sam and Louisa who are pulling a prank on him. And they reveal to the siblings that they saw the kids have been in town for a little bit. They noticed they were going to the graveyard and thought they would pull a little innocent prank on them. And Jerry and Terry aren't that impressed. But while they're looking at nearby the gravestone, Sam and Louisa tend to imply that the person who died in this grave died back in the 1600s. And they are said to pretty much haunt the beach in a nearby cave and insinuate that there's an actual ghost in the nearby vicinity. And the kids kind of shrug it off, but Sam and Louisa are like, no, you really have to listen to us. It's true, and in due time, you'll probably figure it out. So with that in mind, the two kids go back to the cottage that they're staying at with their distant relatives, Brad and Agatha, who are an older couple who have some history with Jerry and Terry's father, who used to come to visit them when he was younger, and it was their father's idea to send them away to this town to be with them so they can get to know some distant family members. And they bring up the idea of Sam and Louisa, these two kids that they met, and how they pulled a mean prank on them, and they asked that if they possibly are related to their family as well, because their last name is Sadler. But Brad and Agatha act really strange about that and say if they are, they must be distant relatives. And then when they get further questioned about something else, they up and leave in a weird way. And the kids kind of shrug it off and go to bed. And the next day, they go on the shoreline, and because Terry has some, weird hobbies of exploring for, I think in the episode, not more so, well, in the book, she's more into looking for wildflowers. I think here she's kind of looking for sea life on the shore. And that's why Jerry's tagging along, because he's bored. But Jerry stumbles across a dog carcass, essentially, but it's been cleaned of all the meat. It's just bones, and all the bones are intact. And this, of course, freaks out the kids. And, of course, Sam and Louisa come out of nowhere again to say, oh, look what you guys found. And, of course, Jerry and Terry are really shaken up by the events, and Sam and Louisa reinforce that, hey, it must be the ghost of Harrison Sadler. He said to inhabit a nearby cave, and they point over to the onlook, and they notice the cave, and they kind of reveal this thing about dogs, where they're said to, give away the identity of ghosts. So ghosts pretty much kill and eat them and leave their bones around, and that's how you know a ghost is in the area. And Jerry, of course, is getting more unhinged about it because he's the main character of the story, and you kind of get this sense that he has some disbelief that he has put at the door, but he's starting to kind of pick up that maybe there is some weird phenomenon going on, while Terry's more nonchalant about it. But after the event, they see a light flickering in the cave, which coincides with a part of the legend that Sam and Louisa told him. And Jerry kind of files in the back of his brain, as we'll see later on, that he might want to go explore this cave to see if there's really a ghost in there. But, of course, they go back to the cottage again, and they talk with Brad and Agatha about the dog carcass on the beach and the idea of going to explore this cave. And Brad tries to steer them in the other direction, saying, oh, the light that you saw could just be the Aurora Borealis. And then quickly changed the subject once Jerry kept pressing to don't go in those caves, it's dangerous. So Jerry takes it kind of like a challenge, and he decides that he's going to go explore later that night. He wakes up his sister Terry, and they both decide to go to the cave to explore. So they head down to the cave, but it's a dark and windy night. It's hard to see. Terry has a close call, almost falls off a cliff in a dramatic fashion, but she's, of course, saved. And they make their way to the mouth of the cave entrance, and they walk in. But here's the difference between the episode, and this is the first thing that you're going to notice with the TV book here. Unlike the episode, which I guess had budgetary reasons why this stuff wasn't put into it, it's more so like the book when the characters first go into the cave to see if Harrison Sadler's ghost inhabits it. They stumble across this area of bats, of course, and then once they get themselves out of the bat situation, they stumble across this room with a bunch of candles and a table in the middle of the room with this figure just sitting there looking off into nothing, essentially. And the description pretty much describes how the book was. So this is very creepy. The kids stumble across the person to observe if it's a ghost, but the ghost looks up at him, makes eye contact, and essentially tells them to stay put, and the kids get freaked out to the point where they try to run away from him, and they make it back to the mouth of the cave entrance, but he takes them back into the cave. He sits them down at the table and reinforces that, he's not a ghost, and he thinks that these kids are here to sabotage him, and the kids aren't really given too much information to him, but he seems to kind of catch on that they've been told that he's a ghost, and he needs to kind of correct that information. So he really tells them the real truth, and it's perhaps Sam and Louisa who are the kids they can't trust. And there's evidence in the northeastern corner of the graveyard they've been exploring in the story. that houses that information that they're going to need. And he pretty much lets them go away. And the kids are like, well, maybe there might be a glimpse of truth here, because Sam and Louisa, we don't really know them or trust them, but we also don't trust this guy. So maybe we should go check it out. So they head to the graveyard. They go up to the northeast corner. And there, of course, they find gravestones that read Sam and Louisa Sadler, that, coincides with what the man told them in the cave. So once they see it, Sam and Louisa pretty much appear out of nowhere and says, hey, what you're seeing isn't really the truth. We've been named after ancestors, a similar story that Harrison Sadler had said before. And they're like, you know what? We actually have found something that kind of incriminates him even further, because it's very suspicious and you have to see this. And they walk him over to this section where these newly dug graves are at. And there's brand new gravestones with their names on it. And the kids are kind of mortified. And now they've been convinced by Sam and Louisa that indeed Harrison probably lied to them, and that they need to trap this ghost forever inside of the cave, because for some reason in Ghost Beach, in any version you ever go down, there's a thing about caves and rocks and how it acts like a prison to ghosts. It's just a thing. So they're like, we need to go tumble the rocks in front of the entrance to make sure he can never escape. So they decide to head over there, but a storm breaks out of nowhere. And by the time they make it to the mouth of the cave, Harrison's waiting there with a dog. And he says that the dog is going to expose the truth. And he whistles to the dog. And the dog starts barking at Sam and Louisa. And there's a big plot twist involved with certain characters here about who's been lying to who and who's possibly been telling the truth. And once that's revealed, a freak, like the episode of Freak Set of Circumstances, throws a lightning bolt onto the cave. But unlike the episode, this is the next big notable change I noticed from it. The effects that we saw in the episode don't really imply what we see on page here, but we get something also closer to the book, where there might be, dissipating skin into skeletons, let's just say. And the climax wraps up after that. And let's just say Jerry and Terry make it out okay, I guess. And they end up back at the cottage, but there's another twist to be involved at the cottage, particularly with some people there. And it's brought on by a certain thing that we saw in the climax. And I won't go any further because then I'll get into outright spoiling what happens at the end here. But that essentially is what you're going to expect out of Ghost Beach's TV book. So, yeah. Off the bat, I guess we could start from this point of view for my enjoyment, okay? I brought this up earlier in the video. I do enjoy this book more than the episode, definitely. And I also think I enjoy a lot about this version here more than the book. And here's why. One thing I really appreciated about the episode was that it streamlined the book and it fixed up the meandering, prank-filled back and forth A and B to seeing Sam and Louisa and Nat in the book prank Jerry and Terry, go back to the cottage, and back and forth with that for like half the book. It cuts out a lot of that. It streamlines events by merging said events, like the whole scene from the book where you see the dog bones in the woods, and then they're exploring the beach one day, and they, find some weird, I guess prints or animals there. I forget what it was. It doesn't really matter. But nonetheless, this, like the episode, combines those two events to make it more streamlined. And it also cuts out a very convoluted part of the book that I did not really enjoy all that much. And that is when Jerry and Terry, in the actual original 62 version of the story, they go to the graveyard before they ever meet Harrison Sadler. So they already are armed with this information about not only Sam, Louisa, and Nat in the book, but also Harrison at the same time. So I feel like in the episode there's a little more suspense to be had, I guess, with the reveal of Sam and Louisa's gravestones in the graveyard. I think it's done up a little bit better there. Except here in the TV book version, you don't have to deal with the bad acting. You don't have to deal with the bad effects. And I think it does help it and make it streamlined. And off the bat, I think there are some good changes here from the episode, at least, or I guess things that the episode more so omitted or couldn't pull off because of budget, that are in here that I think makes it worthwhile. Especially if you're not too big on the original 62 Ghost Speech, and if you're not too big on the episode, but you maybe like the episode for being more streamlined and maybe a little neater in some areas, give this a try, because now we're getting into how faithful of an adaptation is it. Honestly, it's pretty much script for script minus two distinct things that I think stick out to me and stick out for enjoyment purposes, but also make it different enough or closer to the book enough to make this kind of a good compromise for the changes put in the episode from the original book. The big noticeable one is the whole scene when Jerry and Terry enter the cave for the first time to see if Harrison Sadler is indeed a ghost. There's that reminiscent scene from the original 62 book in there when the kids encounter some bats and then they end up in a room full of candles and see this figure just staring off into nothing, and how it's written here is so creepy. None of that's in the episode. The episode does it a completely different way. They stumble across this big old empty room with a single torch in it, and they're approached from behind by this person, and they're just standing there talking without that eerie scene to kind of start it off. I think this whole scene adds about a page or two to the overall context of it, but I weirdly like it because it's really creepy and easily one of the creepiest scenes in this TV book here. And the other thing that I think this one does a little bit differently than the episode, and I don't know if this was because of effects budget or maybe they're going for this certain effect in the episode, but it comes down to the reveal in the end of the climax when you figure out who in fact is actually a ghost. And those effects involve certain characters having their face turn translucent, and then you see these translucent skeletons kind of protruding out of the face. Here in the book, it's more reminiscent, or in the TV book, it's more reminiscent to the original book, where we see characters start to lose their skin and turn into skeletons overall. But it's not as graphically told as the book, unfortunately, because it's not told with Stein's Prouse writing. I think Carol Ellis did what she could here. Other than that, it's pretty much what you're going to expect from the episode. But those two changes there are enough here. Now, if you want to be cynical about the book here, the writing style, it's not like Stein's style, but there is a decent monologue with Jerry to the point where he's fine, like his book counterpart. Terry, she's really toned down from her book counterpart. Makes her a little more enjoyable, and plus, since you don't have her terrible acting going on from the episode, makes it a whole lot better of an experience. And the same thing applies to Sam and Louisa. I think all the lines from Agatha and Brad are pretty much the same exact thing, as well as Harrison Sadler, so all the characters pretty much have the same dialogue. But like I said, you don't have to deal with watching it. You can just sit down and read it. It's like 50-something pages. Enjoyability-wise, I think it's an improvement. For me, a tad over the book. Even though the book had a way better atmosphere, I think, even though the book is a bit more darker in its descriptions and a little more gory and more traditional throwback horror, this is still traditional throwback horror, just a gutted version of that and streamlined. And it has pretty much all the key points that you need from the book here. But it's done better because it cuts out a lot of the meandering and filler, in my opinion. Now, in terms of it being a faithful adaptation, it's not quite all that faithful. Like I said, because the episode omitted that extra scene when they first meet Harrison, and because of that tweak, there is some differences here to explore that make it not a 5 out of 5. Like, this is just a spot-on adaptation. You really don't need to read this because you get this in the episode. No, I think that added scene and the change in the climax is enough here to warrant a score of, I was thinking maybe a 4.8 or a 4.9 for this one. But because of that whole scene being completely absent, I'm willing to give this about a 4.8 out of 5 stars. Other than that, it's pretty faithful. If I had any recommendation for TV books so far, I mean, I've noted that there are a few that I think are worthy. So far, I think Cuckoo Clock of Doom and Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes are the least faithful to their episode counterparts, and they have the most noticeable changes, and honestly are some of the more enjoyable TV books I've read. This one, while it's not the most least faithful ever, this is one of those that I think will, when you eventually see my TV book ranking and how, I don't even know how I'm going to structure it at this point, but I'm mainly going to lead the bottom tier are going to be like the spot on, like shot for shot, the episode, not really worth the time. And then near the top are going to be the ones that I either enjoyed more, that are not as faithful, or the ones that are just enjoyable in general, but could be more faithful. And this one would definitely be on the higher end, I feel, when we get to that at some point. So yeah, go check this book out if you haven't read it before. But if you have, let me know down in the comment section, what did you think about this TV book? Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.